This is A Dangerous World, and I'm your host, Jason Unruhe, broadcasting from Niagara Falls. On tonight's program, the estranged half-brother of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un reportedly met with a suspected U.S. intelligence agent in Malaysia 4 days before he died, according to a Japanese newspaper. Malaysian investigators believe the meeting was the reason behind Pyongyang's assassination of Kim JongNam. At least 29 people were killed in Egypt after an unidentified gunman opened fire on a bus carrying Coptic Christians in what officials are calling a terror attack. A Texas theater has drawn accusations of sexism and exclusion after announcing a woman-only screening of the new Wonder Woman movie. Men's rights activists are denouncing the move, calling it an act of discrimination. 2 Chinese J-10 fighter jets trolled the U.S. Navy when they came within several hundred feet of a U.S. Navy P-3 Orion over the South China Sea on Thursday local time. U.S. officials have denounced the move. And finally tonight, Venezuela's Foreign Minister Delcy Rodriguez accuses the Organization of American States of double standards Thursday after the regional body refused to discuss the political crisis in Brazil, instead choosing to focus on the proceedings in Venezuela. We begin tonight with news out of Malaysia, where the estranged half-brother of a North Korean leader Kim Jong-un reportedly met with a U.S. intelligence agent in Malaysia just days before he died by assassination, according to a Japanese newspaper. Now, Malaysian investigators believe the meeting was the reason behind Pyongyang's assassination of Kim Jong-nam. Kim secretly traveled to Kuala Lumpur to the resort island of Langkawi on February 8th. His arrival in Malaysia was just 2 days earlier, on February 6th, from Macau, where he had been living in exile with his family. Hotel security cameras show Kim meeting a middle-aged woman, Korean-American man with U.S. citizenship the day before he arrived in Langkawi. He had a 2-hour meeting with the man who was based in Bangkok in a hotel suite, according to Ashi Shinbam. Now, the man and Kim had previously met in Malaysia on several occasions. Now, Malaysian authorities have been tracking the man every time he entered Malaysia and believed he may have had links to a U.S. intelligence agency. Kim returned to Kuala Lumpur on February 12 and was poisoned the following day at a Kuala Lumpur International Airport by 2 women, who still maintain that they were led to believe that they were pranking him for a reality television show. The U.S. citizen left Malaysia the day of Kim's assassination, and thus cannot be questioned, nor has the man ever been identified. Malaysian investigators believe North Korea's secret police had learned of Kim's activities in Malaysia and subsequently assassinated him. Now, this does go into something that I had reported initially when this whole situation went down. I said that there were rumors that he was meeting with intelligence officials and that they had asked him to be a part of a North Korean destabilization program. The idea was to supposedly carry out a decapitation effort, take out the leader, Kim Jong-un, and place a member of his family, Kim Jong-nam, in position as the leader to take his place. So that way, it would still have the hereditary bloodline, and people would supposedly ally to Kim Jong-nam because he's family. Now, this was really all speculation that a lot of North Korea watchers had been looking at, but this new evidence that the police suspect that he might have been meeting with a U.S. intelligence agent, they said a Korean-American man, believed to be a U.S. Citizen, while all this was going on, and then wanted to board a plane to go to wherever he was going, certainly does place all of this in a new context. And that would certainly seem to demonstrate, at least to me, that he might have been acting as a U.S. tool of imperialism. He was about to agree to some kind of plot to destabilize the DPRK. And frankly, if you are going to do that, or if you are going to attempt to destabilize, overthrow, or in any way abolish or disrupt a legitimate government, that is going to earn you a death sentence in any country, even the United States. So when we understand this context to it, perhaps we understand a little bit better why Kim Jong-un would go through so much effort to have his half-brother assassinated, because he was, as it appears, was plotting against the DPRK. Sad news coming out of Egypt. At least 28 people were killed after unidentified gunmen opened fire on a bus carrying Coptic Christians in what officials are calling a terrorist attack. 10 assailants wearing fatigues and masks fired on the passengers from the three four-wheel drive vehicles on a desolate stretch of desert road, according to Egypt's Interior Ministry. Hours later, Egypt responded with airstrikes on terrorist camps. The president Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said in an on-camera statement, according to the state-run Nile TV. At this time, it is believed that the militants who carried out this attack were a part of a radical Islamist group that was operating inside of Libya. The Christians were traveling Friday to a monastery, St. Samuel the Confessor, about 100 kilometers or 62 miles northwest of the city of Minya when they came under fire, the ministry said. 23 others were injured, some of whom are now in critical condition. The Minya governor Issam al-Badwi told the Egyptian satellite TV on ONTV. Men, women, and children were among the dead and injured, according to officials. Now, the exact location of Friday's airstrike was unclear, but Nile TV did report that Egypt had targeted terrorists in the Sinai Peninsula on the border with Libya. In this, it goes much more to the suspicions that this was carried out by a radical Islamic militant group inside of Libya. Now, in a statement made on Friday, U.S. President Donald Trump certainly had something to say. He said, "The merciless slaughter of Christians in Egypt tears at our hearts and grieves our souls. Wherever innocent blood is spilled, a wound is inflicted upon humanity. But this attack also steers our resolve to bring nations together for the righteous purpose of crushing the evil organizations of terror, exposing their depraved, twisted, thuggish ideology." Of course, these same words aren't found when the U.S. carries out missile strikes upon Syria or other sovereign nations. Now, the attack comes as the country is still under a 3-month state of emergency period following the twin attacks on Coptic Christian churches on Palm Sunday last month that killed dozens of people. ISIS claimed responsibility for those attacks. Now, it was not immediately clear who was responsible for the shooting, but Coptic Christians have been targeted by ISIS militants several times in the past year, and ongoing violence has triggered a bit of an exodus of Coptic Christians from some towns. Now, Egyptian fighter jets have struck militant camps following that attack on the Coptic Christians. The President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said that they were carried out from eastern Libya. So they seem that very much that these militants are stationed in eastern Libya, which you recall only a few years ago these Islamic extremists were used to overthrow the legitimate government of Muammar Gaddafi. Now, the Egyptian president did say that he would continue to carry out more strikes in the future until those who were responsible for this have been brought to justice. This seems kind of a breaking point inside of Egyptian society, that these attacks on Coptic Christians have crossed a line, or they've happened too many times for it to be something that the Egyptian government can kind of put in the back burner, something that doesn't take full absolute priority given the state of emergency that it's in right now. And they said that he will not hesitate to protect his people from evil. This shows, once again, that these militants, these Islamic militants, are coming out of Libya, a country that, as I said, was not too long ago overthrown by the United States and other countries assisting Islamic extremist forces to overthrow the legitimate government of Muammar Gaddafi. And Gaddafi had his own plans for not only just an independent state himself, but for an independent Africa in general. And many conspiracy theorists have said that this is about Gaddafi creating the gold dinar currency, and that this is somehow proof of the superiority of a gold-backed currency. Such is, frankly, ridiculous, given the face of actually existing imperialism, and that is Gaddafi has used a great deal of the oil wealth of the country to benefit its own citizens, and it gave perks and benefits that, frankly, even Americans could only dream of. And it was access to this oil resource that the United States particularly wanted. Now, Libya also served as a tremendous example of what could be done in some of the most poor countries inside of Africa if one does have the proper leadership and at least a good guiding ideology. Although Muammar Gaddafi was not a socialist, despite the claim by many people, he was not a socialist. He still left things in the hands of the capitalist class. It's just that they had a very strong reign over those individuals. But that's what had to go. The fact that the oil money was going to regular people inside of the country, that has to remain in the hands of private companies, particularly American and British ones that would very much like to have their claws into that, exploding oil wealth. I mean, understanding energy politics in the Middle East is not terribly difficult. We do understand that it is constantly about oil. It is constantly about taking over different countries just to get a hold of the wealth that comes about as a result of energy resources. But this does show once again that radical Islamic militant forces that are being paid by the United States, that are being funded and controlled and being unleashed, frankly, by the United States, is now coming back to bite them, as it happened with the bombing of the Ariana Grande concert, the Boston bombing, the Pulse Club night shooting, and many other examples. And it shows how, despite the U.S. creating these terrorist organizations and funding them, in the end, it is still counterproductive to the so-called claim of wanting to get rid of global terrorism. And now for some lighter news. A theater in Texas has drawn criticism of sexism and exclusion after announcing that they would be broadcasting the new Wonder Woman movie in particular theaters for a women's-only audience. And now a lot of men's rights activist-style individuals have declared that this is a form of exclusion and this is unfair to men, that this is, a whole kind of reverse prejudice or reverse sexism or whatever kind of label that you want to give it. The Texas Cinema, the Alamo Drafthouse, said the most iconic superheroine in comic book history finally has her own movie, and what better way to celebrate that than an all-female screening. Apologies, gentlemen, but we're embracing our girl power, saying no guys allowed for one special night at the Alamo Ritz. And when we say women and people who identify as women only, we mean it. Everyone working at this screening, venue staff, projectionist, culinary team will be female, the statement said. Now, Wonder Woman is generally looked at as a kind of feminist role model. This is a very strong, empowered woman who takes on bad guys, etc. It's a big feminist symbol for a lot of groups. I would actually disagree because I think there's a great deal of sexism to the actual character itself, but that's not something I really care to discuss because that's so liberal, I frankly don't care. But it's funny to see these guys just scream prejudice against them because there's a screening of a movie that they're not allowed to go to, which I can only guess that they would refuse to go see anyway because they would scream that it's feminist propaganda, it's trying to get women to leave their husbands, destroy the family, the Jew Marxist Bolshevik conspiracy, whatever. And a lot of them make the point that that it was really men who bought the comic book for years. It was men who made the movies, and it was men who created her. And now women who do absolutely nothing are the ones trying to steal her. When did any of you, to use his own word, hags, buy a Wonder Woman comic? They never did. Of course, this statement is frankly ridiculous. It's really symptomatic of a larger thing that clearly these people don't have real problems in their lives. This is a very, as you would imagine, I would probably say, first world problem. Because, frankly, this doesn't matter. This is so completely trivial in the face of the real problems that the world is facing that this isn't actually a problem at all. And a lot of them made the ridiculous comparison. Change women only to whites only, and then see how you look at it. Because apparently that's totally the same thing. At least in their mind, it's pretty much the same thing. But then again, the solution to this is actually quite simple. If it says women and people who identify as women, just show up to the movie theater and claim you're a woman. I mean, it's not like they can prove that you're not, so you can go see it anyway, and that would, I guess, that would show them for what that's worth. I mean, in the end, this is a first world problem. It's not even a real thing that grown-ups, or real grown-ups, would frankly even care about. It's a small, petty, token thing that doesn't affect people's real lives in any way, shape, or form. Even at best, it's some kind of nice, soft, liberal reform or some nice token liberal protest gesture that doesn't challenge anything. All it does is get a bunch of, frankly, men-child angry. But again, in the end, pissing them off might just be enough. A very interesting situation took place in the South China Sea, where two Chinese J-10 fighter jets came within several hundred feet of a U.S. Navy P-3 Orion over the South China Sea on Thursday, the U.S. official said. Now, the fighter supposedly flew within 200 yards of the P-3 Marine surveillance craft with an altitude separation of 100 feet, the official said. Now, for some kind of comparison, let's look at this. This is the Ferris wheel that you find in Niagara Falls, and this Ferris wheel is about 115 feet. So now you can get some kind of idea of how close these fighter jets actually came to the U.S. Navy. They said the aircrew deemed the intercept unsafe and unprofessional, said U.S. Navy spokesman Gary Ross. Operations were able to continue. Now, according to a U.S. official, the Chinese jets were weaving ahead of the American plane, an action that concerned the pilot, meaning they flew up close to him, did a few tricks, just flip-flopped. According to one report, he did a barrel roll and then went away. It seems more likely the Chinese planes flew in, did something special to get their attention, to shock them a bit, and then leave. It sounds a lot like the Chinese Air Force just trolled the U.S. Navy. I mean, in the end, all they were doing is letting them know how close they actually were to their territorial waters. And the Chinese were letting them know that they were keeping an eye on them. They just did it in a particularly stylish way that seemed to, I would say, butt fluster the U.S. Navy. Now, the U.S. Navy said the U.S. plans to address the incident with the Chinese government, letting them know how mad they are as a result. And now, this encounter appears to have happened the same day that a U.S. Navy destroyer USS Dewey sailed within 12 miles of the Mischief Reef in the South China Sea, conducting a freedom of navigation operation by the artificial island claimed by China. In other words, yes, they were being somewhat giving provocation by going near Chinese territorial waters, and then China sent them a message, hey, we know you're there, we know what you're doing, and then did some hot dog stuff to throw it in their face, and that made them angry. Apparently they just frankly couldn't handle that. Now, the incident was characterized as unprofessional, a U.S. official said, or in other words, we mad, bro. And finally tonight, news that is a bit more serious. Venezuelan Foreign Minister Delcy Rodriguez has accused the Organization of American States of double standards on Thursday after they refused to address the ongoing situation in Brazil and instead continued to attack Venezuela. 1. The immorality of the Organization of American States and their Secretary General, Luis Almagro, who have kept silent regarding the repressions in Brazil. 1. Now, in a follow-up tweet, Rodriguez accused the OAS of hypocrisy for insisting on discussing the political crisis in Venezuela and deeming the situation in Brazil as something that cannot be talked about. Now, as if you're paying attention to Latin American news, you know that there's a great deal of upheaval in the Latin American country right now. Now, the comments came after an OAS meeting on Wednesday where the majority of the regional bloc's member states voted down an Ecuadorian proposal to discuss the crisis in Brazil. So it's clear that there are other member states of the OAS that are concerned about the fascist goings on inside of Brazil, but for some reason we're just not going to talk about this, but instead we're going to talk about someone who's not a U.S. ally, Venezuela. but we're going to pretend that whole the U.S. is attacking Venezuela thing just didn't happen. Now, the country's unelected president, Michael Temer, is currently bogged down in a bribery scandal, as well as facing calls to resign over allegations of abuse of power and excessive force against protesters. His left-wing predecessor, Dilma Rousseff, was removed from office after being impeached in 2016, and what many observers labeled as a right-wing coup, and that seems to be, given the information that's available about the incident, that seems very much what's likely happened. But Brazil's OAS ambassador, Jose Luis Machado, argued his country's crisis was an internal matter. There's no alteration or risk to the constitutional order, he stated. However, this doesn't seem to have applied to the situation in Venezuela, which he is more than happy, and many OAS states are very happy to try to get themselves involved in. Now, Venezuela's government made a similar argument for the OAS in April this year, after several member states pushed for high-level talks on a standoff between the country's opposition-controlled National Assembly and the presidency. Venezuela's insistence that the discussion violated the rights of national sovereignty was roundly rejected, and then later Venezuela announced its intention to leave the OAS, which is certainly a good idea, because if the OAS is continually going to interfere in their politics, which is currently under attack by U.S. imperialism, but the U.S.-backed regime in Brazil is not even going to be discussed, even though it's going through a real crisis, an outright unelected leadership, as opposed to the democracy that is Venezuela, then certainly, you would want to think these guys really aren't trying to help us, but in fact are probably trying to hinder us. Now, for months, Venezuela has been locked in an economic and political crisis, with the country's opposition demanding the resignation of the current president, Nicolas Maduro, of the Popular Socialist Party, who they accuse of abuse of state power and excessive force against protesters. The government charges the opposition with pursuing regime change against an elected president, which seems very much as the situation is going on right now. And even now, it has been announced that there will be elections ahead of schedule, which are intended to try to oust the current president, Nicolas Maduro, despite the fact it was claimed that he would not allow elections ahead of time. So you're a tyrant if you allow extra elections, but of course, it's not going to make sense because it's coming from the United States attempting to delegitimize the government of Venezuela. And I've frequently gone into a whole, tirade or rants about how this is what happens when you allow a U.S.-controlled opposition. It's not even like this is really the people of Venezuela arguing for their future. This is over the United States interfering in Venezuelan politics. And this is something that should not be tolerated in any way, shape, or form. But we will see how strong the Bolivarian government is when these new elections come around, and hopefully Nicolas Maduro and the Popular Socialist Party will remain in power. And that'll do it for this episode of A Dangerous World. I'm Jason Unruhe. Thank you for watching.